morning to the Americas, good evening to Asia, and hello to the rest of the world. Watching live, and also hello to everybody watching the recording on our website. Welcome to Lufthansa Systems, Let's Talk About IT. We have already had 2 installments. This is now the 3rd installment of Lufthansa Systems, Let's Talk About IT. After our original one, as we were dealing with the crisis right at its very beginning, and the one in May was looking at how alliances and cooperation can help airlines out through the crisis. And now we're talking in this 3rd installment about data and artificial intelligence, giving the airlines a competitive edge in the current recovery mode, as many airlines thankfully are now finding themselves in this new normal. So today I'm delighted to welcome our 2 speakers, our keynotes for today. We have Manuel and Christian waiting for us, but just to kick off with a few housekeeping topics. This is a Skype call, as you can see. It's being recorded. This recording will be shared on the website after the session, and the chat window will not be part of that recording. All participants are muted by default. You're invited to post your questions in the chat window. And Q&A, of course, there may be an opportunity to answer directly within the presentation, but we've got some time reserved for afterwards to go through a Q&A session at the end there. So now moving forward, I'd like to introduce today's presenters. We have on the right-hand side there, you see our lead business talent, Manuel van Esch.
Hey guys, Manuel here. Thank you very much for tuning in. I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
And another talent we have here from the senior analytics team, Chris Spann.
Yes, thanks, Alistair. Very excited to be here and talk about the current crisis and how data and AI can help.
Okay, thank you very much, Manuel and Christian. Now, both of these consultants are from our company, zeroG. zeroG is a Lufthansa Systems subsidiary. We founded the company in 2015. Goodness me, that's 5 years ago already, but we were one of the first movers. Basically, the idea is to create end-to-end data science solutions. We now have around about 50 or 60 data science and aviation experts, a rather unique combination of skills. These ladies and gentlemen have already delivered over 50 successful analytics and artificial intelligence and machine learning projects across the world, may I add, and have been rewarded with 5 innovation awards and patents internationally. So without much further ado, I would like to hand over, I'm being reminded here by my friends here internally. Thank you, Hildegard. To introduce myself, my name is Alistair Thursfield, and I'll be your compere for this hour. And I look forward to some further exchange throughout the next 60 minutes. So now, without much further ado, I'd like to hand over to you, Manuel.
Excellent. Thank you, Alistair. Also a good call to introduce yourself. Then let me quickly introduce zeroG. So as Alistair already said, founded in 2015. And one thing that we focus on is data. Data, in the end, is the very core of what we do. It's the very core of where we breathe, and it's the very core of our DNA. But it's not only core that we try and focus on. The other part of it is definitely bringing together both the aviation expertise with today's data science technologies. There are many different ways of looking at data science, obviously, and there are also very generic approaches to this. The one thing that we always look for is figuring out what's the right process to start working and leveraging the power of data science. What kind of data is needed? How can we build analytical tools that really support the aviation experts, the aviation users? This kind of like leads into the second aspect of our daily work, is that we really look and focus on the user. So in the end, we want to build analytical tools that support network planners, crew managers, revenue managers, ops controllers in their daily work. So instead of looking at the tools that they're already using or the processes that are already in place, we really look at what's the user's goal, what's the network planner's goal, what's the revenue manager's goal, and how can we derive insights from that data that they really need to work with on a day-to-day basis and start improving their daily work.
Yeah, excellent. Manuel, thank you very much for that. Now, seeing as this is the heart of the zeroG, let's say, approach, I think it's going to be really important to just let that sink in for a couple of seconds. There's a lot there, but this is going to be, for everybody watching, this is going to be the core of what you're going to be understanding and watching throughout the rest of these slides. Okay. Sorry, not too many interruptions throughout, but I just wanted to highlight this one. Very, very important. Back to you, Manuel.
Excellent, thank you. Yeah, so this has been true for the last 5 years, as you guys know, as Alistair already pointed out. But yeah, currently we're in a very different situation. It's what financial analysts call an event-driven bear economy. So which is in contrast to cyclical or structural bear markets, there is a very direct event that caused today's bear economy and to cause airlines to hibernate. This obviously has very clear implications for analytics as well, because it poses the question, what kind of data can we still use that's collected over the last couple of years? What kind of expertise do we have in-house that we can use as well to build new models? What is the worst of these of the old models that we still have in place that are trained on historical data? So the question's basically the way that we've collected data historically, plus the questions, the models that we've been creating over the last couple of years. But still, most important element of all of this is that even and more so actually in these times than in times before, it's very important to know which are an airline's customers, what are their needs, what do they really want, keep operations lean, and adapt quickest to change. Airlines that will be successful in doing that will definitely come out of this crisis strong, and will use that advantage for the years to come. Where it used to be that analytical models had to squeeze in the next 3% in revenue management or the next 5% more leanness in operations, today it's really the driver of, are you quickest in adapting to current changes and customer demand, and can you keep operations lean? And if you can do that in an agile way and quick, then you'll come out of this crisis a lot stronger.
Yeah, just to strengthen that last part, the adapt quickest, I think is the key message here. I mean, we see that with the obvious customer-facing things that airlines have been pressured to obviously adapt to, let's say, cleaning and hygiene. How do we block the middle seat for a certain amount of time? Some airlines have done that, but it's also internally, right? Manuel mentioned in the revenue management or network planning area, tools that have been used for years and years and required stability don't work anymore, at least not in the perspective that they used to. So how do we adapt that as an airline in the quickest way? And those airlines that don't have to rely on the tool that may use old data that's not worth anything anymore will be the winners out of this crisis.
Absolutely. Speed is key in this case. Thank you, Chris. So, but what business value can you then derive from machine learning? And this is a very high level overview. So also historically and also moving forward, machine learning applications have been helpful for users in a way of better understanding customer demand or better understand problems. For airlines, the most clear solution there is definitely the ones that they've been using for their customer service agents, quickly sifting through lots of data that clients might have put into their complaining or questioning or whatever data field as well, and then use machine learning applications to figure out what are the trends, what is lying behind these complaints, what's lying behind these demands. And then through that, really understand customers better and start moving forward. Another example is creating predictions. For instance, predicting which passenger might miss their connecting flight, so you do not board their baggage, which you then have to unload when they do not make their connecting flight. So using machine learning to predict specific steps to happen in the future, and then take actions to avoid that from happening. A third way of deriving business value from machine learning is definitely augmentation. So using historical data and try and build possible future, seeing what is possible based on historical data. Airlines or organizations in general that just stick to the facts are also running behind the facts. So what you want to do is use historical data and machine learning to see what possible outcomes can come out of a decision you wanted to make today. And the final part of the business value that you can derive from machine learning is through automation. Taking specific tasks that now your analysts do, your engineers do, or your network planners do, and automate that through machine learning. A very clear example is collecting data from one Excel sheet to the next Excel sheet and compiling all of that data into one insightful dashboard. These are tasks that you can look at to start automating and leverage the power and sifting through what data is very necessary for you and start boosting your business in that way.
Yeah. So depending on the area of the airline that you're working on, it might seem crazy to say, hey, we're definitely already at the automation stage rather than understanding the data. But it can actually create value out of all four aspects that Manuel just mentioned. So even the can we create more data in an area like network planning or revenue management, where the argument has long been, we have lots of data, we have competitive data, we have scrape data and all these things. In times of these, let's say, unstable data points where historic price points, historic scheduling information capacity, it's not really valid anymore, you might have to get a little bit more creative to get the info to answer a certain business need than before. So it's really a wide area, and you may argue, we're definitely here or there, but there's actually value out of all four of those.
Absolutely. So what Chris pointed out correctly is that we need to have a little bit more creativity today to figure out what data points can be relevant for us today, and how to build models that are really helping us as airlines move forward. But the general framework around this didn't really change much. And what we'll be sharing with you guys today is the 5-step approach that we developed over the last couple of years into creating machine learning applications that use your airline's data and publicly available data to the airline's benefit. And the first step of these 5 steps might be a little bit surprising, but it's also the most complicated one. And it focuses on creating a competitive edge for your airline. A recent McKinsey study found out that only 30% of organizations align their analytical strategy with their broader strategy. Companies that do that scale AI effectively are 4 times more likely to align those, though. And it doesn't mean that you have only C-level people making a decision on a specific point and analytics being uncoupled from that. It really looks at what do I need as a business leader from my data to make better informed decisions, to align both strategies. And as an analytics leader, look at what kind of data do I have currently in place and how can I support that from the business needs from a data standpoint. Combining these two is definitely very important, and we'll come back to that later in a second step as well. So step 1, as I described before, is definitely figure out what are the needs that your business has. And as described before, this sounds like a very straightforward one, but I'll give you a couple of examples how that can work. I'll give you 2 examples to be exact. So the first example is a project that we've done in network planning, where we figured out that airlines, or an airline told us that they wanted to have a quicker way of evaluating the business case behind increasing or decreasing specific routes, starting a new route, or canceling an existing route. Okay? So there was a very clear need that they identified, and before we didn't just run away and started developing a solution like that, we also made some success factors or some project targets that we connected to that. One very specific target was that in the end, if the analytical solution was running, we wanted to be able to evaluate the business case for any network change within 10 minutes. But it's a very specific target. And the other thing that's very important when you define the business needs is looking at the user insights. And in the network planning case, it was very important to discover that many of the network planners didn't really trust the tools that they were given. So they were tinkering and tailoring along the way. So for us to build an analytical solution, for us to build a machine learning application, it was very important to ensure that people have trust, that the users, the network planners, have trust in the machine learning application that we were building. And all these 3 things come together and then basically builds the business criteria for your machine learning application or for your analytical application to be really successful and be accepted by the user. Another example that we worked on was in the crew, that I want to highlight, is in the crew environment, where we identified that a specific crew manager from a specific airline said we wanted to know what are the prime drivers are for our crew calling sick or canceling on the last moment. So we can use that kind of information to see how many crews we need to have in the future on standby. So for this specific project, we made a target, just to highlight one target again, of an X amount of million euros that should be saved using this application. And this is the way that we thought of building the business needs for your airline for any analytical application to be created. And this is really important that you take this as a first step. So you define what is the business need and what are the criteria I need to deliver on this.
Yeah. Very, very good. Manuel, may I just stress also for those listening who are less familiar with zeroG, these projects went from concept to execution within a very, very short space of time and completion. Now, zeroG is a lean, mean machine. Which is why we set the company up to specifically be able to address things super quick and really efficiently. Now, as we go through these 5 steps that you started highlighting there, I'd like to also invite the audience to feel free to post any questions that you have in the chat. We'll be able to address them as we go, free flow. Otherwise, we'll deal with that later on at the end in the Q&A. But please, everybody, feel free.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll be very interested to see what you guys would define as your current most urgent business need. We'll have a look at how we did this historically and how this step applies in the current situation. So, Chris, can you walk us through the examples that we wrote down here?
Yeah, absolutely. So feel free to type in any current business question that you may have, and we can probably follow up with them throughout the presentation. We brought something with us here to start with that I think all airlines are facing, and on a high level, it really goes down to, so how do we make this restart happen? When do we start which route again, if even? And obviously that gets more granular as you think about it. It's not just, hey, do we start flying from A to B again, but do we up gauge, down gauge, frequency, double daily, once a day, 3 times a week? These types of decisions are extremely difficult, and it's obviously much more complicated than the initial question phrases. What Manuel mentioned also for the step 1 in terms of target, right? That's really, really key. And it sounds sometimes a little easy to say, okay, well, I think the target is pretty clear. If it's the revenue management or network planning, it's profit or revenue driven, maximize revenue. But often when we drill down and talk about that, we're going to later talk about how we would set up such a structured way in terms of how you spend a few days walking through this first step is, what's the actual target? And although for revenue management, it could be maximize revenue, that seems very, very clear. It could actually lead to being a little different than before, right? If you're weighing the cons of spill and recovery as before, you're like, okay, maybe you take too much demand early on and then you're full before departure, which is obviously unfortunate, or the other way around, that you actually were too aggressive, too high on your pricing before and you couldn't fill the plane. There may be certain incentive to take the less risk, the risk-averse way right now to just make sure that load factors are up. Other factors like, okay, I'd rather fly at 2/3 and have the middle seat open might have also business value. Business value could also shift to, I'd rather have more customers flying now, obviously still at maximizing revenue, but a secondary target as well to have people kind of reconfirm that flying is okay again. So these are all drivers, and you really got to define what your goal is, because it's more painful to open this up again and really have that clear setting from the very beginning and then measure against it at the end. So the moment the question is not, or the goal is not really, really clear, you're going to have to come back to it, and that's definitely beneficial if you have that set up from the very beginning.
Absolutely. And it basically feeds into the second step as well. Because if you want to have or want to use analytical tools or machine learning tools in your own organizational data, the most important part after you define the business needs and the target that you want to tackle, the target that you want to reach, you'll have to have a team that really is quick in setting up and answering those business questions. You'll need to have, it used to be the case 5 years ago, 6 years ago, sometimes even recent, where you had a very specific business track that created the analytical demands, and then you had an IT track trying like solve and come up with the right tools to answer those business needs. Yeah. But the projects that we've done and the projects what we would say are the most successful are the projects where you have a multifunctional and diverse team. So where a network planner works together with a business data analyst and works together with a data engineer, or works together with a data scientist. And even now, it becomes like more complicated to set up teams that can really collaborate, right? Because the questions became way more important, first of all, and way more holistic as a business question as well. So you really want to have a team that's able to understand both the business questions as well as the data technical needs, and then specifically look continuously at the user experience. Continuously look at, is this going to be accepted by a user or not? And a team that's able to both understand the data science as well as has the domain expertise is really the best way to move forward in creating value from your data quickly. This slide really shows the 5 most important capabilities in doing so. So you have to have the domain expertise, as I described before. This can be network planning, this can be revenue management, this can be ops control, and depends on the business question you want to have answered. Right? Then you have the data engineer, the one who's working on preparing the data and setting up the data pipeline, ensuring that the data can be accessed and the data is of the right quality for your machine learning application. Analytics and machine learning, then building the model to figure out what are the outliers, how can we automate, how we can find the insights that we need moving forward. Data analyst to visualize these kinds of insights, and then the transformation part, where you have someone who's able to explain what the data is telling to management, and at the same time build an analytical tool stably within the existing IT framework. So these 5 capabilities are definitely very important to move forward quickly in creating value from your own data through machine learning. What does that mean for today, Chris?
Yeah, so the step 2 for me definitely is probably the biggest driver. So the diverse team is really the one that brings in all the things that we mentioned in the beginning with the heart, right? The aviation expertise, the process know-how, as well as the data expertise, and it can be engineering and data scientists, all the way up to, okay, who's the end user? And that may be in certain cases the customer, the actual customer of an airline, so a passenger, also users within the airline, so a crew planner, a network analyst, or a revenue management analyst. So bringing all these together, not just in the function of, okay, we have a plan, let's do it, here's your work package, but actually already in the planning and the discussion phase. That's extremely beneficial to say, hey, let's do it this way, with the actual person that would be doing the actual task then coming in and saying, hey, I have a better idea, how about we do it this way? It can be a huge time saver, it can be a huge driver for not being stuck after 3 weeks because something was planned without the person that actually has to work through that then. So at least from our previous project, that was definitely the success driver, I would say, to actually deliver on time, to have these people all working together in the discussion phase already and not just in the delivery phase.
Absolutely. And then, as we described before, speed is definitely important. The right team helps with that. But for any machine learning application, what's really important, obviously, is the data. So what's the fuel like, as we'd like to say it? What's the fuel that feeds this machine learning application? And you'll have to look at it from 3 different ways. First of all, you have to ensure that the quality of data you're training your machine learning algorithm with is of high quality. It's reliable. One of my most favorite examples is where we've got a data set to figure out what's causing delays. And of that data set, a majority of the flights were all leaving on the same day in 23:59, which obviously cannot be the case. But that meant that there were so many outliers in that data that we could not use that to build our algorithm on. Right? So the quality of the data and ensuring that the quality of the data is good is of high importance. And the second part is to figure out how can I get this pipeline? How can I get access to this pipeline or to this data source? And how can I create a data processing pipeline that makes all of this data available in a structured and organized way so I can start using it? You might have to ask yourself the question, do I need more IT to use this? Yeah, so more IT could be like building a federated database. So you have all of the kinds of data that you need within one database, even though you source it from different sources. And it's true for today as well, where there are various steps in moving that forward.
Yes, so we can take any example, for example, the current issue that on the demand side that leads to better decision making on the commercial side, whether it's network planning or revenue management or pricing area. that you used to have purpose-ready data that, it all worked fine, it fed the systems, but now this historical data set is, let's just say, less valuable than it was before because we're just in a different world, especially during the, let's say, grounding and recovery phase that we're in. So you may have to use certain new data sources to make better decisions, or at least get insights on demand indications, demand picking up or going down again, maybe for a second wave. And this data could be something like, for example, from your .com, so from your airline.com website, people searching but not actually flying or buying. So it's not booking data, but search data. And this data is oftentimes, for example, sessionized, so it's really not in the perspective that a network planner or revenue manager would like the data to be at, but rather, hey, this person clicked here, then he scrolled, or then she clicked here, and then there, and then she didn't end up buying, or she ended up buying. So it's very unstructured. So that first step is of huge value to make sure that we convert that into the purpose-ready data that can then be served into the analytical insights and gain perspective into, hey, we have more and more demand from this country to this country, or hey, we see another steep decline in other areas. So that first step is really, really crucial, but also understanding this unstructured mess in the beginning. And oftentimes that's where it plugs in with step 2, the team, right? Working with the people that have worked with this type of data set before that can tell you exactly, hey, if you intended to use it this way, don't, because we know we don't capture that type of stuff and you're going to run into problems. Or on the positive side is, hey, yeah, we've done something similar before. Make sure that you take into account this or that. So, for example, multiple people searching, or it's only one person searching multiple times, that you have these kinds of complexities that somebody has already gone through last year, 2 years ago, last month, that you have these learnings as part of your team and you can save a lot of time on this prospect. Yeah, and then once that's ready and solid, you can move to the next step and actually gain these insights and then make better decisions based on that.
Yeah, very good. Chris, can I just highlight here, we've had a contribution from Jim, who's saying that, I just give him the platform here, definitely the demand prediction indication on market level, also given the uncertainty of competitor scheduling and government restrictions. That seems to feed very much into what you're saying there.
Yeah, that obviously fits nicely with our example. The last part is interesting with the government restriction. There's no central repository yet. There is an IATA website that could theoretically be scraped for larger countries. Like if you're looking at an airline that operates, I don't know, 95% of its international traffic to North America, you obviously see on the news whether the US opens up or closes down again. But if you look at all the other countries, smaller countries that, maybe one by one doesn't make up that much of your entire traffic, but cumulatively actually sums up to 20 or 30%. That's definitely an interesting perspective to see how you could automate that and make sure that you have, at any day, you have a good understanding of how much of that, let's say 20% of lots of countries where you can't manage it one by one, how much of that is opening up again. And that could be indications through your .com websites, through bookings, through information like MIDT or DDS. It could be from the IATA website. These types of things is definitely an interesting perspective to look at, and then compare these data sources whether they plug in. For example, country opening up, but you don't see bookings, right? Hey, is this something an analyst should look into? And that's the interaction of a, let's say, mini tool or mini solution with a team that's actually working on making the decision.
Yeah, very good. So thanks very much, Jim, and also for the second contributor. Forgive me for not being able to pronounce your name. But that's something that we won't be seeing this in the recording. So thanks, Chris, there for also highlighting that second question that we have there.
Excellent. Yeah. So moving forward from here, right? So you've identified your current business needs and set some very clear and concise targets for what your machine learning application should reach. You set up a team of people that should be able to answer these business needs through data science and through their domain knowledge. And you have identified which data sources are important to answer your business questions. Plus, you set the quality standards that you want to meet as well, right? Don't forget the quality standards. That's extremely important. And also ensure that you know how to access this data and make sure that you always have it in a format that works for you. Then step 4 starts, and this is one of the most important steps. So instead of start building something and then plan for a full year how this machine learning application or how this analytical solution should work and have a very large project, we always go for piloting. So you look at the data, you look at the business need, and you do some small scale validation. You measure the success of that small scale validation and say, is this data really helpful to identify the business needs that I need to work on? And then from there on, you start to play, tweak, and adapt the data that you have, manipulate the data, figure out what's the right data, what are the right drivers. And you can see that here as an example where we took crew management data to identify what are the prime drivers behind crew absence for a specific airline, to figure out what the drivers are and then start predicting in the future as well. But this is really just a very first initial dashboard built within 2 weeks, so 1 week, and just to figure out what are different variations that drive crew absence, and what then is the foundational basis to start building our predictions on. So that leads us definitely to a current situation as well, Chris, where you also have to look at using data in a different way to get to meet the current business needs, right?
Yeah, so with the setup of the 3 previous steps, that's definitely part where you really want to focus on, okay, what can an MVP, what can a prototype look like? Really focusing, okay, what's the initial question that we need to solve, and how could an 80% solution look like? How can we already make good progress to kind of validate whether we're on the right track, or if not invested, months and months of work and time, then to scratch something and go another way. So the piloting part is really where, okay, we may have 10 different types of data sources that we could use, but narrowing down, okay, what are maybe the top 2, 3, 4 ones, depending on the size and complexity of the problem, that we could use to answer 80% of the problem in the beginning. So for the example that we had with the demand, and also with the question that we had, or the business input from our chat with the government restrictions, that's something that we could add here. We could use the .com data, so web analytics data, and actually booking data, so people actually booking to make certain predictions on, hey, we expect this much demand to be there. So there could obviously be additional data sources like competitor schedule, partner schedule, interline availability, all these types of things. But for us, the pilot phase is often, okay, let's have something more stable that we can run with. And then we're going to lead to step 5, which will be scale. Spoiler alert, how we can make it better later, but really focus on the initial step 4 here to build something that's useful. Again, looking at the previous 3 steps, this is definitely already the part where you should deliver something to the user, to the customer, whoever, whatever the solution is for, to get feedback as soon as possible. Like, hey, this is what we've done so far. Is this how you imagine it? Will this help in your decision making?
Absolutely. This is very hands-on developing machine learning applications that are really valuable both to the users as well as management, and makes it worthwhile to invest or to spend time on developing a specific machine learning algorithm to meet your business needs. As Chris already said, the final step is then definitely scale. I think that makes a lot of sense that as soon as you did your piloting and you validated the course of action, you validated the data that you have available, you validated the quality of your team to deliver on getting insights from that data set that you've identified, that you then start scaling. So in the pilot phase, you really focus on 2, 3, 4 data sets and start figuring out 2, 3, 4 core data sets, figuring out what trends can I find. As soon as you start scaling, you start to make predictions more complicated. You start making integrating other data sources, and you started integrating other domains as well. And you start expanding smartly along that way. Just to give here another example that we worked on, which is the network planning example that I said before, where we wanted to enable network planners to review and calculate the business case of any network change. You can see here all the augmentations that a specific network planner can make, and include all the other data sources as well. It's not just figuring out the current demand or the future demand based on historical demand, but includes also a cost analysis to calculate how much money can I in the end really make with this network planning decision, and what kinds of passenger flows will move over to my competitors. What kind of passenger flows can I retract if I just move with an hour? So the spill and recapture features here as well integrated, and make the whole application more realistic to real life, and ensure that the users have the information they need to make better informed decisions based on augmentation of possible future outcomes.
Yes. So Looking into this more concretely, obviously for the scale part, this is also, as I talked about, the pilot, where you may start with, let's say what can be the first step, maybe not use 10 data sources that are available, but actually limit that and see what the 80% solution is. On the scale part, it's really, okay, how can we make this go big? Right, for the example, on the coming back to the demand example, restarting routes, what is the right pricing and steering in these times? It could be that you want to include, in addition to your own analytics data, which we had an example here on the first step, your partners. So for example, within an antitrust joint venture, you could argue that, hey, while this may work really, really well with my website data to have a demand indication within the markets that have a large direct share in terms of channel where people buy on your own.com, it may be very, very different markets. The pilot idea may have not worked out so well. So you want to get better in that area, for example, for international traffic, and include the analytics data from your partners, and vice versa, obviously jointly work on something that can help fill your international flights within a JV. So that can definitely be something. If you look back at step 2, this is also, if you add these types of things, more data sources, and we highlighted this here with the work across departments, it's obviously also across whatever you add. So if you work with partners, I think it's similarly beneficial to include them as you just want to work together with, for example, your marketing colleagues that manage your .com. That's the same argument here. On the scaling side, again, this is not you do the pilot and then you build the full scale, but so this is also iterations, right? So it's not a go small and then go big in one step, but rather do multiple smaller steps and continuously get better at it, so that you don't have one delivery after 1 month and the next one in 6 or 9 or 12, but rather incrementally getting better, adding and more markets. For example, if you have a pricing solution or a demand prediction, just increasing or getting better in terms of I'm predicting this demand, and the forecast accuracy is hopefully getting better as well. So that's really the last part of the 5-step program that hopefully then leads to the best application solution within your analytics team.
Absolutely, and it keeps feeding back to the other steps as well. So throughout the scale phase, definitely iterate back and forth. Figure out, are you still answering all the business questions that you wanted to answer? Are you meeting those targets? Is the team still able to scale this forward, or do you need to have a different team set up? Do we need to include what are the kinds of data? How can we access that data? How can we automate the access to the quality data? And then pilot that again, and then scale. And this is basically the iterative process that Chris just described as well. So, as a summary, look at, as a first step, figure out exactly on day 1, what are the top 3 priorities that we want to set as an airline or as a part of the organization, your specific department? What are the top 3? What are the top 3 things that on the strategic level you'll need to answer? Then day 2 and day 3, scramble a team together that you think and you believe can answer these questions. That you believe is cross-functional, able to answer the business questions, business needs that you've identified before. Then take day 4 and day 7 together with this team, figuring out what kind of data sources do we need to answer this business need. How do we gain access to this? Data, and already start playing out if the data quality that you need from the data is also already available. Then day 8, take the next week and figure out how can we pilot this. Just visualize it. Is a visualization the best way to go about it? Find out prime drivers and start moving from there in a very small scale validation, but don't take more than 1 or 2 weeks in doing that, because otherwise it would be a waste of time to continue that as a course. And then from the week 2, week 3, start expanding this smartly. As Chris said before, keep iterating between the 4 previous steps to ensure that you keep building up a machine learning application that uses reliable data from your organization, and so you can start building the competitive edge through your own data, publicly available data, and your own built machine learning applications, moving forward out of this crisis and into the new normal. With that, we rounded up our 5-step approach, and I'd say, Alistair, would you like to start into the Q&A? Not sure if questions came in.
Okay, yes, well, Manuel and Chris, thank you very, very much for that. Please allow me to also thank and credit Georgia with the last, I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Georgia, with the last comment with regards to the government restrictions in the EU. Now, we've got some questions that have come in also offline, and I'd like to kick off immediately now. Manuel, I think probably best for you to address this one. not everybody who's watching right now is a data scientist, and not everyone has had necessarily as much exposure to artificial intelligence, machine learning, even deep learning in the most extreme iteration. Could you, just for everybody online and watching the recording right now, please just highlight a couple of key differences, or how we should differentiate between artificial intelligence and machine learning?
Yeah, absolutely. So artificial intelligence is more like the generic term that people use for a set of analytical tools that augment human cognition. You can think of machines that see, machines that can write, machines that can interpret information. But it's like a very, very marketing, very broad term to use the term artificial intelligence that way. Machine learning is really described as another set, like within artificial intelligence, of algorithms or machines that do a very specific task. And I think the majority of people know this from more and more on LinkedIn, YouTube videos, where you can see a computer making a decision whether that's a cat or a dog, or also now is able to differentiate between different kinds of cats or different kinds of dogs, right? And in our day-to-day work, we also have these kinds of machine learning applications that do a very specific task in identifying or filtering out, so to say, what belongs in our inbox and what belongs in our spam box. So there would be a difference between AI and machine learning. They're linked, where AI is more the generic term of a set of analytical tools that augment human cognition, whereas machine learning is really specifies a set group of algorithms that do very specific tasks, as I described before. And the goal, what you want to do, I think, as an organization, is figuring out which kind of machine learning application works best for what business need based on the data that you have to deliver a very specific task.
Okay, thank you very much, Manuel. Now for Chris, I know a lot of people who have clicked onto this live webcast, and also a lot of people who will be clicking on to the link in the internet later on onto the recording, will have been attracted by the word competitive, or the expression competitive edge. Chris, can you just go into a little bit more detail, or rather summarize how this machine learning approach that we're talking about here is really going to be giving an airline a competitive edge if they follow this type of approach?
Yeah, I think that goes a little bit to the beginning when we talked about the airlines that will be best at, in an agile way, in a quick way, deliver on these changes, right? So oftentimes it was that airlines needed to be innovative and customer expectations change incrementally, digital adoption, by 1 or 2 or 3% every year. Applications got to get better. And this crisis just accelerated that. Or I don't even know if accelerated is the right word. It fast forwarded or jumped to new expectations from customers, new expectations on cash flow generation as well. So the airlines that don't, so it has moved from a nice to have or a nice innovative thing that you write on the annual report to a necessity for a lot of airlines, and probably all airlines around the globe. So the competitive edge, depending on the area that you work in, depending on the department that you are with, on the commercial side, network planning, revenue management, there's not a lot of bad decisions that you're still allowed to make before the airline might not make it, right? So the data-driven decision-making is a key foundation of that. Whether it's restarting routes too soon or too late can have a significant cash flow impact. Personalizing the customer experience, being touchless towards the customer, sending the messages at the right time, whether it's about hygiene or actually upselling certain ancillaries, all these types of things must be accelerated now, but not in the usual 12, 36, 48 months type of project program, but rather how can we deliver something by June? How can we deliver something by September? These are the time frame that airlines are going to be focusing on. And obviously the ones that are more set up for this already have an advantage, I would say, a little bit, definitely. If certain data governance, data lakes are already there, and the way of working in this agile setting is already existent. But even others, you could argue that this type of setup now has to be created anyway, so it's a great opportunity to get started and see what can be done within weeks.
Absolutely. And just to feed off of that, in the end, the competitive edge is also on the kind of like business needs or the kind of action fields that you as an organization know that's already either your strength or your weaknesses, right? we kept mentioning a couple of examples, but there are like tons of action fields that you as an airline can pick and say, this is the one thing that we believe is our strength, or this is the one thing that we believe is our weakness, or a competitor's strength or weakness, and start working from that. One of the examples that Chris already gave was in the network planning element, where you can now really create from scratch again a banking system that's most ideally set up for your particular customer group, right? Or you start automating processes that you knew that like historically was always done manually, costing your team a lot of time. Automate that so your team is able to start focusing on the things that matter, whereas maybe your competitor is still doing a lot of things manually that can easily be automated, and move forward from there. Or build up a situation where you can do management by exception. We just like deliver for a client a recommendation engine for flight ops controllers, where instead of a flight ops controller continuously looking at all of the information and processing all of the necessary information, we build in a machine learning application that does that for the flight ops controller and integrates a recommendation engine. This is still like a piloting phase. This is still trying out, can we use this kind of machine learning technology to meet this business need? But for so far, the flight ops controller's feedback was tremendous, saying this is great to find out and focus on the things that demand my attention and not spend a lot of time looking at all the information that can possibly process, right? And those are the things where you as an organization can strategically deploy machine learning applications that fit your business strategy, and where you can derive insights that are unique to your specific organization as well. This feeds into the topic of the competitive edge.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you very much, gentlemen. Let me pass on this one question that we've received that's just come in right now, a bit more concrete. Can you predict which flight route will be repeated and when? Now, of course, that's very specific. Please don't give me a "it depends" answer. Let's please see how we can help this lady or gentleman out.
Yeah, I already had the "it depends" in my mouth. So I'm going to try to phrase it without that now. So perfectly, obviously, no. Right? There is, if we would be able to do this, I think I would have been retired 6 months ago already. But definitely in terms of on a more granular level, saying that, hey, tomorrow 10 people are going to request to fly from A to B. Very, very unlikely that we would be perfect by that. But obviously learning to say, okay, what is the actual business need behind it? What do you actually need to know? And then the problem might come down to, well, actually, I don't care whether people search from A to B or A to C. I just want to know if they're going to end up on flight 1, 2, 3. Right? So you might start aggregating that question a little higher, which actually helps then the data science to actually predict on a more granular level, on a higher aggregated level. Instead of predicting 10 passengers for a certain day, you might be predicting 80 or 90 in that type of scale, and that makes it a little easier. Yes, if we say there's going to be a demand of 80 passengers tomorrow for this flight, you might still be off by 10 up or down. Right? But then all of a sudden you're in an area where you can work with and say, okay, we have a clear goal. How can we get there? What are the data sources that we need? Is it the .com data? Is it booking data? Is it IATA DDS data? And then start from there and say, okay, we have a clear goal. We can measure against it every week as we get better. So I would say, yes, with the right data and the right aggregation and the right, let's say, expectations on how close you want to get.
Yeah, wonderful. That was a close question. The answer there being yes, it is possible to predict. Good. Yeah, Manuel?
And it depends a bit then. Yeah.
Manuel was allowed to say it then, I guess.
Need you put. So let me skip up one question above that was, would you be able to work on a project immediately, or is there a wait list? Welcome to the airline world.
Yes, wait list. It depends. What we usually do in this case is we take an hour, 2 hours on a phone call, figuring out what are the exact business needs and what are the success factors and targets that you would like to aim for. And then as soon as we define that, we'll look forward and then have to figure out what kind of people can we from zeroG side supply that complements the team that you have already in place in a separate meeting, and then have a quick look at the sample of the data. And as soon as we have identified these 3 steps, we know for sure how long a project can take and can start planning that straight away. So to say whether we could start straight away or not, that's not too easy. We need to have these 2-3 steps in between of figuring out what are the business needs of an organization, what is the team that we to work with or we can work with together that complement each other, and then have a quick look at the availability of the data and the quality of the data that's necessary to match those business needs. And then we can make an easy assessment of how long that time will take to deliver at least the first pilot.
Okay, yeah, very good. So once again, that was a closed question of would you be able to work? The answer there being yes, right?
Absolutely.
Straight away. Excellent. Now we've got another one here mentioning one of our dear colleagues, Clemens Wolf. So how does the concept actually fit with the AI-powered assistant that Clemens Wolf, our colleague, presented yesterday as part of the famous Azure 4 seminars?
Excellent. Yeah, for sure. So our colleague Clemens Wolf was yesterday at the Aviation Force, just to give a little bit of the context here to the people that might not be aware, on our pilot project, as I mentioned before, where we created for a European airline a recommendation engine for flight ops controllers. And what we've done in this with this project exactly looks at the 5 steps that we've identified before, right? So we had a very clear business need of flight ops controllers being overwhelmed by the amounts of information that they have to process, and saying, okay, and we made a very clear target as well, saying we want to be able to create a machine learning algorithm. In this case, we built a reinforcement learning application that minimizes the effect of minor disruptions on the flight plan, right? What we then did was step number 2, where we looked at what are the kinds of people that we need to work with. So we had 3 data scientists joining on that project from zeroG side. They worked very closely with the flight ops control from this European carrier, and we had a UX person constantly looking at the way that this information was delivered, right? So how does the machine interact with the flight ops controller that doesn't disrupt its daily workflow? So again, that's like feeds into step number 2, where we set up the right team for this kind of project. Then the second or the third part feeds into the data element as well. For us to build a flight ops control recommendation engine based on reinforcement learning, as my colleague or our colleague Clemens showed yesterday, we had to ensure that all the data was available. You cannot build a recommendation engine if you do not know if this data is available, right? So we looked at, in this case, Netline Ops++ from our colleagues at Lufthansa Systems, and for the first time, trying to figure out, can we identify within the stored data when a specific flight ops controller took what action in what context, and what was the effect of that decision, right? And that was basically the very first. Step that we've done there, which was a longer project a little bit, where it took 2 months of time to. We called that project Marshot. We took those 2 months of time to figure out, can we use the data that's available here before we build a machine learning application? And then, so we had that figured out. Luckily, that data was there. The data was usable. We set up a data access pipeline. We set ensure data quality. So all of this data could be accessed at the right time. And then we did a pilot project, right? So where we took one specific recommendation and action. We took one specific action. In this case, we focused in the pilot phase, or in step number 4 here, on the action of tail swaps, and build a decision pipeline throughout for just this one step, for just this one action of providing a flight ops controller with a recommendation for a specific tail swap, and then provide, based on the historical data as well, what would be the outcome of making this tail swap or not, right? And now we're currently in step number 5, where we're trying to include more data sets. We're trying to include more processes beyond flight ops control, beyond the tail swap, and start scaling this as a solution, start really scaling this as a recommendation engine that flight ops controllers can rely on in making better informed decisions. So the project that our colleague Clemens Wolf showed yesterday exactly follows these 5 steps to the point, and shows how effective this is to build in a couple of months, 6 months, in this case, a recommendation engine for flight ops controllers effectively. And exactly, so thank you for that question. That helped me a lot to also highlight those 5 steps again, and just how quickly and easy it works to build a solution like this.
Yeah, excellent. Thank you very much, Manuel. One more question now with regards to organization within airlines. I know we've got quite a few representatives from airlines watching this right now, either live or the recording. I think a lot of them are probably sitting there saying, well, we've tried these tiny initiatives ourselves, and we just somehow haven't managed to get the right staff together. It was on one of your slides earlier on. You talked about it already, but just can we bring that to the forefront? We've encountered these difficulties as well. Often enough within our family airlines and also with other airlines all over the world. How is it that we... Oh, excuse me. Can you please just highlight how we have dealt with the challenge of getting the right people into that role altogether to be able to move things forward and actually turn projects like this into a success? So maybe over to you, Chris.
Yes, thank you. I would say the success drivers, we talked about this earlier, and you mentioned how can we set up the right team, and oftentimes that's, obviously we as a company that wants to help these airlines, that's part of our business model. It's always a conversation with the customer then in terms of how can we deliver something very, very quickly, and then saying, hey, this is our approach to it. How about we do it this way and discuss, and then within this very short amount of time, deliver this first increment to kind of showcase, hey, this is what we've experienced. How about we set it up this way, and then find a joint approach that works for everyone, and then showcase that this works really, really well. If you would have the secret sauce that always works, no matter what, I would say that doesn't really exist. It will always be a little bit tailored to the circumstances, whether it's cultural or complexity of the operation and how siloed it may be on the data side, on the people side. But just being open, transparent, and really saying what is that first step that we can reach within weeks that kind of gains the trust of everybody, of leadership of the airline, but also the colleagues that everybody's working with, all the interfaces with the various departments. The moment you can actually showcase, hey, this is what we've done in 4 weeks, in 8 weeks, and we're already delivering, at least for the first stage, that can be a huge driver for success because it builds that trust. And obviously that's part of the entire 5 steps to say, okay, what's actually the business need, and what can be that first step for that pilot? Do we have access to the data? Do we have the right team set up? All these questions need to be worked out. But really the trust part through the first delivery, I would say, is a big driver. I don't know, Manu, if you have something else from your experience.
No, I think just like you explained it well, and just to sum that up, the main thing is that you focus on user needs, focus on quality data, and then deliver. I think those are the 3 most important things, and be very clear and very candid if you cannot, because otherwise you'll get a very long project where everyone will be dissatisfied at the end of it, and it just didn't help anyone, and a lot of money will be lost. So it's definitely what you said, Chris. Focus on the user or the business need, figure out the data, and can this data derive the insights that you need, and then say yes or no within a week or 2 weeks, or max, I would say 3 weeks. And don't take it further, and be very clear on that, very honest on that if you cannot deliver. And there's no shame in that, because sometimes the data simply is not there, or you simply cannot answer a business question with the available data.
Yeah. Excellent. Okay, gentlemen, we are now coming to the end of our 60 minutes, and I'd like to offer you the opportunity to just have a couple of words just towards the end to sign off, before I then wish everybody a good afternoon, evening, or whatever else. So over to you, Manuel.
Yeah, thank you very much, guys, for tuning in. I hope this was entertaining and educational to a certain degree. It still stayed a little bit like on the theoretical level of those 5 steps. I usually know that it helps to have this kind of like framework moving forward. If you have any more specific questions or any more specific needs that you want to discuss with us, please reach out. It's definitely always interesting to talk to airlines and hear what you guys are working on, and specifically on the AI and analytics element, where everyone's like, now really the momentum is there to derive value from this. This is really exciting times to work on these kinds of stuff. Chris, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, no, really. Thank you. It was quite fun to talk about this. Like Manuel said, and also I think we've seen that in the questions, is that the whole demand, how does it pick up? What type of demand is really the baseline, or one of the base questions that everybody is facing right now. So that was interesting, whether it's used for airlines or airports. That seems to be the key. So if you want to have a deeper discussion on that, we would be happy to chat and discuss jointly the approach. And we as an industry kind of work together to go through this recovery phase and pull everyone through.
Absolutely. And just to finish up then from zeroG side, Alistair, I really want to wish all of you guys, all your airlines, a lot of strength, health and wisdom in making the right decisions moving forward, and that we all come out stronger than ever from this current crisis. Thank you very much for your attention and time.
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Manuel and Chris, and thank you everybody for listening today, and also thank you for listening and watching if you're going to be watching the recording at a later date. Now, as airlines' budget buckets have now reduced to the size of an espresso cup, it's becoming more and more important to really focus on what is going to give you that competitive edge. I hope this has been an education for you as much as it has for a lot of us around here. Thank you very much, everybody. Questions will be responded to on our website. This is going up as a link, as a recording onto the website. So as Manuel just said as well, please everybody, take care, stay safe, and thank you very much.